Alright, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I'm here to talk about my rankings for every NFL quarterback going into the year 2024. But before we get into it, if you enjoy, let me scratch my beard for a second. Let me take a big sip of water. But there are a few things I want to clear up after I take this sip of water, so one sec. Alright, let's get right into it. So, rookies are unranked. We haven't seen enough, in my opinion, of certain rookies to judge how they are compared to other actual quarterbacks that have been playing for, at least a few games. Like, my criteria was at least a few games. I think the person on this list who I actually have ranked, who has played the fewest games, is either Aiden O'Connell or Anthony Richardson. But yeah, three notables that have no slide: Penix, Brissett, and Fields. So first of all, Penix is not starting over Cousins this year. Brissett also is starting this year, but I don't think May is going to sit for very long, so I gave May the nod for Patriots starter in this exercise. And Fields is someone who I don't think he's really going to get on the field much this year unless Russ is a total disaster and gets benched, which there's a non-zero chance of that. Like, I could actually see that happening, but I don't think it's likely. Now, this is how good I think these QBs are now. Not based on historical stuff, not based on what they did last year, not based on what they've done throughout their career, not based on the fact that they won MVP 10 years ago. This is just purely based on how I think they are going to be coming into this year. So what I have listed: offensive coordinator, notable weapons, offensive line ranking by PFF, backup ranking, which I did on my backup quarterback ranking videos, so go check that out, and my overall thoughts about the quarterback. So let's start out with the unranked ones. I want to start out with the USC QB, the prize of the draft, Caleb Williams. Now, he is going into an incredible situation for a first overall pick. Usually the first overall pick is going to a team with trash weapons, a trash offensive line, no defense, questions at head coach, questions that, maybe the executives got fired last season and now a new regime is taking over. None of that is happening with the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams. And the only real one you could question in that criteria is Eberflus the guy? And no, I actually think he's pretty terrible. But still, Caleb Williams is heading into one of the best situations a first overall pick is headed into in a very, very long time. He has DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, and DeAndre Swift. That's who he will be throwing to. And I think any QB would be excited about that, regardless of experience. But the fact that Caleb Williams gets a massive, massive talent bump from the time that he was at USC to now the NFL. I mean, I know that he played with some talented players at USC, and obviously NFL weapons are better than college football weapons, but he's legitimately, arguably, probably getting a top 5 skill position arsenal in the league right off the bat. And he's expected to play at a high level immediately. He was a great improviser. He could make any throw. He had a reputation of being, that off-balance throw guy who could just do it all, and also had some mobility. So I'm really excited for Caleb Williams. Now, another guy who's unranked was Jaden Daniels. Came onto the scene really hard this past year at LSU. Heisman winner, gets drafted to Washington. Second overall. They just hired Dan Quinn and Adam Peters to be their head coach and GM. But one thing that does concern me about Jaden Daniels is I don't know how his play style is going to mesh with the Kingsbury offense, because is Daniels going to be an air raid quarterback? But also, Kingsbury, one of the biggest fake sharps in the league. I have no idea how he found another job after the crimes he committed in Arizona. And I'm expecting this to be a rough year with a lot of growing pains. Jaden Daniels, I think the talent is pretty solid. Granted, I do have my questions. As to if he was made by Neighbors or BTJ. I still think he's a good player, but that is at least a valid argument before we see Daniels in the NFL. But he is going to be throwing to Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, Ben Sinnott, and then the tandem of B-Rob and Eckler. So the weapons, I mean, they're kind of unproven besides Terry McLaurin, who's a great player, but still ultimately might end up as a what could have been sort of guy. But yeah, so that's kind of my expectations for Jaden Daniels headed into this year. Great runner, huge arm. Yeah, but my expectations for 2024 are up in the air. So yeah, New England, let's go with the third pick of the draft in Drake May. Now, Alex Van Pelt is running his own offense for the first time, so we're all curious to see how this goes. But May, he drew a lot of comps to Herbert and Allen when he was coming out of UNC, and I could see why. And I could see why New England fans are so excited for him to be their franchise quarterback. And this really showcases New England's revamped philosophy on the offensive side of the ball, because yes, you have Drake May and he's going to be your hopeful franchise quarterback, but this is a team that has struggled a lot picking offense over the past few years. So I'm really excited to see hopefully a revamped offense in New England. Again, this might be a rough year. We don't really know the expectations. Like, I don't think New England's going to be like an ultra high scoring offense unless Polk and Baker are just somehow a lot better than we thought they'd be. And, you know, another step from Pop Douglas. But yeah, Drake May, you are unranked, as is JJ McCarthy. So we're in 4 out of 5 QBs that were taken in the first round of this draft that I have on here. Penix too, but obviously I don't have a card for him. So JJ McCarthy, now he is a huge mystery box. He was not asked to do anything at Michigan. So JJ McCarthy, he was not asked to do anything, literally anything, at Michigan. But a lot of people say that he's a B+ prospect in every asset. He has a B+ arm, B+ accuracy, B+ speed. Actually, I thought his speed was pretty good. But regardless, a lot of people think he's just some, you know, limited guy. And I can't say I agree nor disagree. But one thing I can say is I don't really love the fit between JJ McCarthy and Kevin O'Connell. And here's why. Kevin O'Connell, throughout 2 years in Minnesota, has not shown a propensity to have a very strong rushing attack. And we obviously saw JJ McCarthy at Michigan, where they had Corum and Edwards, and they were rushing for like 7 yards per carry and a pretty good offensive line. And I don't know, Kevin O'Connell, we just haven't really seen him scheme that, at least yet. But you're throwing to Jefferson, you're throwing to Addison, you're throwing to Hawkinson, and you do have Jones and Ty Chandler in the passing game. So yeah, again, McCarthy, he's just more of a mystery box, but I really was not a fan as a prospect. But one guy who I was a fan of as a prospect, and one guy I actually had over McCarthy, was Bo Nix. And here's the thing about Bo Nix. People are questioning as to if Stidham or Wilson is going to start week 1. It's going to be Bo Nix. And if it's not Bo Nix, the Broncos are in trouble, because this is a guy that has literally started more college games than any other quarterback. You used a first-round pick on him, 12th overall, so you can't really have Stidham start behind him or start in front of him. And if he does, then I don't know, it's just not looking good. But regardless, Bo Nix is somebody who I thought the discourse of as a prospect was also pretty unfair, because people talked about him as if he's like this low ceiling guy. People talked about him as if he was Alex Smith or Teddy Bridgewater, where the guy has literally no upside other than just being a game manager. And again, I thought that was pretty unfair, because you look at red zone, you look at third down, you look at his speed, and you look at his arm strength. I think Bo Nix was very, very slept on as a prospect at Oregon. And this is probably going to be a rough year for the Denver Broncos in general. I'm not expecting them to be a very good team, but the 2024 Broncos, it's more about the process. It's more about how does Nix look? How do our young guys on the offensive side of the ball look? Can Mims take that step forward? Can Franklin take that step forward? How does Jaleel look in his second year? How does Estime look in his rookie year? Is Dulcich healthy? It's more about that than it is about record, but I do like Bo Nix. Now we are beginning with our actual rankings of quarterbacks, and coming in at dead last, we have Daniel Jones. Did you expect it to be anyone else? Like, honestly, we have literally been watching a show for the past month that showcases how his current front office is trying to replace him. And he has set the franchise back years in 2 ways, I'll say. One, he got drafted as 6th overall. Not his fault, or let me just say, neither of these were his fault. He got drafted 6th overall in 2019. Did not understand the pick at the time. Didn't even think he was the quarterback who should have been selected there at the time. But either way, just wasn't really impressed with him at Duke. And that was the first year I really dove into college tape with quarterbacks. So yeah, just not really wondering. We're kind of wondering what Gettleman was thinking on that one. Incredibly strange pick. But the fact that they doubled down on this mistake and gave Jones an effective $40 million a year contract after he played against Ed Donatel's defense in the wild card round against the Vikings. Make no mistake about it, this guy is the worst starting quarterback in the league. He just is not good. He throws bad picks. He has bad turnovers. He can't sense pressure. He has no vision as a passer, which is weird for such a mobile and athletic guy. Like, the fact that he still has not figured it out and it's year 5, 6 in the NFL, you could argue that the Giants are in the worst possible situation as far as quarterback, and they have been over the past few years, because Daniel Jones, he has barely shown anything, but he showed one game of playing well, and I guess you could say 2022 was a successful year for Daniel Jones and for the Giants in general, but it led to him getting an extension, which basically kicked the can down the road for the Giants, and now they're going to go 5-12 again. Like, what is the point? What are we doing here? And now he has neighbors. Now he has Wandale, who had a good year last year and who has been pleasantly surprising me in the NFL. Slayton, he's a steady veteran presence. I believe he's a captain as well. He's like your 750-yard guy, but he doesn't offer much. And Hyatt could break out as well. And this will be a true testament to how good of a coach Dable is, because if you can get Daniel Jones to work, you can get anyone to work. 26, we are going to go with Will Levis. Now, one thing I will say, even though I wasn't a fan of him as a prospect, and I wasn't a fan of what he showed last year, I will admit, he is very physically toolsy. Like, his arm strength is at least top half in the NFL. But why did I not like his prospect or rookie tape? I just did not like that he had a propensity to play hero ball. I did not like that he really seemed to lack awareness when he was throwing. I remember a game in particular against the Steelers. One of his interceptions, or near interceptions, looked terrible and looked like literally a high school quarterback was out there not even knowing what he was doing, just making terrible throw decisions. But he does have the excuse of his offensive line last year was pretty bad. Like, Andre Dillard may legitimately have had one of the worst O-line years I have ever seen last year. But they did add Ridley, they did add Boyd, Pollard as well this offseason. So Rand Carthen and the Tennessee Titans, they have put some chips into this Levis basket. They didn't draft a quarterback this year, despite the fact that they easily could have. So yeah, again, this offensive line, they did add some guys, but it's still projected to be a rough one at very best. But yeah, I was not a fan of him, but we'll see what Callahan can finally do with Levis. 25, Aiden O'Connell. Disclaimer, this one is not a he's bad rating. It's just a more like, okay, we need to see more. We'll know more of what he is very soon, because I assume that he is going to get the start over Minshew because he is the favorite right now, and Vegas is the land of odds and land of the Raiders. Yeah, I don't know, but Aiden O'Connell, he showed last year that he has legitimate staying power in the NFL. Is he just a high-end backup? I mean, he very well could be, but he played very well in the back half of the year, and he was a big part of why the Raiders ended up turning their season around and ended up completely saving their year when you consider the absolute disaster that the Josh McDaniels regime was in every sort of way. But yeah, he's going to be throwing to Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, and Michael Mayer. That's about as good of a group of weapons for you to be able to prove yourself as the guy. Like, I know the Raiders, they could probably use another weapon, unless you think Trey Tucker is your wide receiver 3 of the future, then by all means. But this team is very stacked, top to bottom on offense. Or actually, running back, they're not too stacked. But as far as pass catching and the passing ecosystem, I'm really excited for Aiden O'Connell. They have a good pass blocking line as well. So yeah, let's just see what happens. Incredibly impressed from watching him at his days in Purdue that he's even at this point. So yeah, number 24, we have Bryce Young. Now, what I will say about Bryce Young is you're probably going to be like, dang, why is he so low? Or you may be asking, why is he so high? Because he is a relatively divisive player, even though I think most people are giving him a pass because of how putrid Carolina was last year. But I am extremely concerned by 2023 because people are like, what? Oh, he had a bad offensive line. Well, guess what? They added 2 guys in free agency, but you're still kind of just hoping that that line can click and play well again. Or not again, but you're hoping that they can play well and finally keep Bryce Young upright. But one of the huge things that concerns me about Bryce Young is he is a 5'10 quarterback that doesn't have a lot of mobility. I understand that you have guys like Kyler who have made it work, and that's completely fine. But in the modern NFL, you need a quarterback who can take off and run. And Bryce Young, he doesn't have that escapability in a sense. He doesn't have that ability to just push the pocket and move outside whenever the play breaks down because he just doesn't have that natural speed. And that's extremely concerning for a 5'10 quarterback. So everything that happened with Carolina last year that people are just like, well, the receiving room is bad. Guess what? The receiving room is still bad. Adam Thielen is your wide receiver too. And guess what? You drafted a clone of Jonathan Mingo this year in the first round. You traded up for him. They added Deontay Johnson. They added Jonathan Brooks. So that is something, and those are some moves that I do think Carolina needs to make more of. But I am concerned about Bryce Young. I'm not pushing the panic button yet. I'm not trying to say he's a bust. But based on what we've seen so far, I cannot put him any higher than 24th. Number 23, Aaron Rodgers. So I know that this is going to make a lot of people mad because a lot of people are just going to see the name Aaron Rodgers. And, is it fair to call him the Odell Beckham Jr. of quarterbacks at this point? He has not played any live football in 18 months. He's a 40-year-old with a major Achilles injury. So my expectations for Aaron Rodgers are very, very low. But the problem is, this is a Jets team that when they traded for Aaron Rodgers, when they were able to finally get him to come over from Green Bay, they were legitimately expecting a Super Bowl contender. They had Hard Knocks, they had all the hype last year, and we're not going to know what the Jets would have been like with Aaron Rodgers because them with Rodgers the Jets are still a relatively unproven commodity with Aaron Rodgers. So yeah, it's still a mystery box as to what that team would look like, but Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, 2 of the best young skill position players in the game, like in the entire game. And the PFF offensive line ranking, I thought was just, yeah, okay, 5th. All right, cool. I see what we're doing there, but there is a non-zero chance that Rodgers is just done because this is a team that's being coached by Nathaniel Hackett, a team that still has questions up front on the offensive line regardless of what PFF wants you to think. And yeah, I think that you should really temper your expectations if you're expecting big things out of Aaron Rodgers in 2024. And if he shows it week 1, week 2, then by all means, I'll be happy to admit that I'm wrong. But I think the game has passed him by. 22, Derek Carr. So I think that the Saints are going to be in for a catastrophic year, and here's why. Carr was not good last year until December, and many of the Saints' important games, he came out and looked completely flat. Think about the game against the Lions. Think about the game against the Rams. He was actively bad during those games, and the Saints have literally no solution other than him, and maybe hoping that Hainer or Rattler can just break out. Good news for Carr is that you have Olave, you have Shaheed, you have Kamara, you have Jawan Johnson, and A.T. Perry. Means is another guy that they added in the draft. So that is a pretty stout receiving core, and that is a lot of guys who can at least do something in this league. But PFF ranked this offensive line as 32nd, and if you have a quarterback who's over 30 years old, it's not an option that you need a good offensive line. And sure, they had bad luck with the Ramczyk thing. I hope he gets better. Rest up, Ramczyk. Or that made it sound like he's dead. No, he's not dead. He's just missing the year. But yeah, so I hope he does get better. But again, it's probably going to be rough. You were starting Trevor Penning out there instead of Ramczyk, and cool, man. The addition of Fuaga is probably going to help offset any pain that you're feeling along the rest of the offensive line with McCoy, who's actually pretty good, and Ruiz, who I know a lot of people say has not played up to what he was supposed to be either. But Derek Carr, he's a guy who I looked at last year, and I'm just like, wow, he really, really looks, I don't want to say washed, but this Carr is something that we never saw in Las Vegas, and I just want to know what is going on. because if he doesn't fix it out, then the Saints are probably tied down because they don't have very many means to replace him. 21, Russell Wilson. You can look at the 27-8 touchdown to interception ratio from last year, and you can be like, okay, according to the box score, Russell Wilson played pretty well, and he did everything they needed him to do. And in a lot of cases, that was what happened. Like, particularly in the first month of the season when the Broncos defense was giving up like 90 points a game, Russell Wilson was a good quarterback. He made all the throws he could make. He could push the ball down the field. We were getting a lot of yards on offense, but as soon as teams took away the sidelines and made the Broncos play the middle of the field, Russell Wilson was incredibly limited as to what he could do. And he was a decent game manager as long as it was, okay, don't turn the football over. We'll rely on our defense to get turnovers. And you guys just do you. We're going to have ultra-conservative play calling because Russell Wilson has a tendency to run himself into sacks and turn the ball over if he's not kept on a leash. That's kind of what happened with Russell Wilson last year. And they were winning games in the middle of the season, but it was not due to Russell Wilson. It was due to Courtland Sutton making awesome catches and the defense going on a historical stretch of turnovers. But they are going to Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson is going to Pittsburgh. And I think that Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh is actually a pretty decent fit because he provides some stability for your quarterback room while you're waiting on Fields, and he's going to try to alleviate and rebuild the culture from the disaster that was Kenny Pickett. But also, who does Sutton comp a lot to? George Pickens. George Pickens is going to make some of those outstanding catches on a Russell Wilson moonball. And Roman Wilson, I'm surprised to see what role he gets. I'm curious to see what happens if he's going to be over the middle to where Russ surprisingly doesn't target. Same with Freiermuth. But Warren, he's another guy who I like for pass catching downs. I think he's a lot better than Najee on third down. And yeah, overall thoughts, I think he is a decent game manager. And I think if the Steelers are fine with winning their like 20-13 typical like NFC North showdowns where there's not a lot of offense from either side and there's a lot of bad blood that shows on the field during the game, then yeah, I think the Steelers will probably go 8-9, 9-8, or 10-7. Like, that's just the Mike Tomlin way. Like, no matter what, no matter how bad the roster is, we know that he's going to drag them to 10-7 or 9-8. That's just the facts of it. But Russell Wilson, he's a stopgap, and it really feels like his career is winding down. 20, Deshaun Watson. The Deshaun Watson of old days is probably over. Like, you are looking at a guy who is nowhere near what he used to be. You can see it with the way he acts. You can see it more importantly on the field because he does not have the same drive. He does not have the same fire within him, and he doesn't have the same ability either. That can happen when you take a long time off of football, and the Browns, they thought they were going to get a top 5 quarterback when Deshaun Watson came over. Like, when Deshaun Watson stopped playing football, he was a bona fide, at very worst, top 5 quarterback in the sport. So Cleveland took a swing even amidst all the legal stuff, and yeah, that was, I don't know, an interesting choice by them. But Stefanski is going to dial up some good stuff for Watson and the Browns offense in general. I expect them to be a lot more pass heavy this year, especially because Nick Chubb is not getting any younger and he basically had his leg snapped in half. I'd be surprised if he came back even as, you know, a fraction of the semblance of a player he used to be. And obviously you still have some guys that are like Ford and Strong, but those guys are mainly better pass catchers in general. Amari Cooper, he is what he is. He'll have his 2 to 3 like great games a year and then disappear for the rest of the way. Njoku, good presence over the middle, but again, some other guys, Judy and Elijah Moore. So this team, their identity is their defense. Like, that is how they are going to do well this upcoming year. But again, this is a QB rankings video, and all I have to say is that Deshaun Watson's days are probably numbered. Of the 5 games that he actually won for Cleveland last year, the only one he won outright for them was the Baltimore game. Every other game was just the defense going off or just some tomfoolery. And yeah, 19, Geno Smith. So he was a fun story in 2022, I'll acknowledge that, but he's only a plus game manager, meaning he's not necessarily a game manager, but he does have his limitations when he's playing football, and that's pretty obvious. Now, Grubb coming over from Washington is very interesting to me because Smith is very similar to what Grubb had in Penix in a lot of ways, and same with DK and Odunze and just a lot of other things there. DK, Lockett, and JSN are very comparable to what Washington had at the college level as far as weapons goes, but this is a team that has a bad offensive line, according to PFF. So let's see if Lucas and Cross and some of those guys can take steps forward and just be better in general than what we've seen over the past few years, because it wouldn't be a Seahawks O-line ranking video if they weren't near the bottom. It feels like they've always been there. But Smith, he had a good breakout, and he will have the Seahawks in a couple of shootouts. He's had them in some shootouts over the past few years. I remember against New Orleans. I remember against Detroit last year. And he is clearly taking a step forward in his NFL development. So good for him. Good for him for finding out a role, even if it did take him a little bit in the NFL to get that role. And it did take some bouncing around. But yeah, I'm super happy for him. And yeah, we'll see what 2024 looks like. I'm actually pretty optimistic on Geno this year because of Grubb being the OC. So yeah, 18, Anthony Richardson. I know that a lot of people are going to be up in arms about this because we didn't even see 4 or 5 full games. We saw him leave early, I'm pretty sure, in most games. But Shane Steichen is going to dial up some heat for Anthony Richardson in 2024. Michael Pittman is their wide receiver 1, and Anthony Richardson is a guy who I think every coach in Florida, every offensive coach who coaches for Florida over the past 7 years needs to be arrested, because that team, they do not use their talent effectively whatsoever, and they haven't for dear Lord knows how long. But Anthony Richardson legitimately has game-breaking potential. He has Cam Newton, Jalen Hurts hybrid potential, and I think that the 2022 Eagles are going to come back this year, but in the form of the 2024 Colts. The defense isn't going to be as good, but I'm expecting this running game to be insane, and I'm expecting this passing game to be insane too, because Anthony Richardson, he did show a lot of good stuff on film. He did show the propensity to just whip it in there. He did show the propensity to make 45, 50-yard throws just look effortless, and that's why I say he has insane potential, but he needs to stay healthy. And durability, it might be something that factors into these rankings if I get around to them next year, because I could see Anthony Richardson, I could see him missing time again, and then people being, or knock on wood, I hope he doesn't, but I could see him missing time and then people being like, well, yeah, he looked great when he was out there, but if he can't stay healthy again, I don't know. But yeah, so AR-15, or he's AR-5 now because he wears the number 5. He has his work cut out for him. Going to the Indianapolis Colts, a team whose secondary has been littered with disaster in the past few years. So the Colts are going to be in some shootouts, and it's going to be interesting to see how Richardson responds. I do think he is right now the best odds-on bet to win MVP. He's plus 3,000 or something. And if he, we're kind of obsessed with, as a community, with shiny new players, and if he's good again, look out. All right, I'm actually starting to record this once again because I fell asleep in the middle of this, and I resumed it because I made this at 1:30 a.m. last night. So I just woke up. Let's resume it. So with the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield, he had a resurgent year last year after being an afterthought in Cleveland and them getting rid of him, shipping him off to Carolina cutting him and Sam Darnold outplaying him, to him taking an Uber to a Thursday night football game when they were playing the Raiders, and he literally had no time to prepare. He has found a home in Tampa Bay, and it looked like this QB competition was on its way to being absolutely miserable last year, because it was Kyle Trask versus Baker Mayfield. So a guy picked at the end of the second round, which anywhere from mid-second and beyond for a quarterback, you're just kind of throwing a dart in the draft. And Baker Mayfield won the job, and not only did he win the job, but he had a good year. He was good for what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers needed him to be, and I'm just extremely proud of where he's come. Now, one big thing about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is that they have lost offensive coordinator Dave Canales. He did go to Carolina, so I'm interested to see what the offense looks like under Liam Cohen, but a lot of people aren't expecting that big of a downgrade, as crazy as it seems to say, because you still have Baker, who's playing at a very high level, or at least did last year. You still have him throwing to Mike Evans, throwing to Chris Godwin, and a few other guys that have ramped up from the past few years, like Cade Otton, who always seems to be there whenever Baker Mayfield needs him, and Rachaad White, obviously out of the backfield as well. But Trey Palmer was someone who really came on strong at the end of last year, so let's see if he can take that next step forward coming into this year. But yeah, I think Baker Mayfield at 17, he makes perfect sense for this, because he is somebody who I'm not like upset if he's my quarterback, but you know, he is what he is. I don't think anybody is expecting him to be the answer in Tampa Bay, like they have the position settled for the next 10 years or anything like that. But he is what he is. He's a plus bridge guy, and maybe even a little more. So yeah, good for Baker Mayfield. Now 16, Trevor Lawrence. A lot of people, so this is one where fans will say he's terrible. The media will say, no, he was exactly what he was promised to be. It's probably somewhere in the middle, because you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they were 8-3 last year, and people forget that. People forget that they were an 8-3 football team before they absolutely collapsed, and one of the biggest reasons why they collapsed was because Trevor Lawrence was playing injured. And here's what I will say about Trevor Lawrence. He has not lived up to the college hype, but it was very unfair. I never understood where the hype was coming from to begin with, because he regressed from 2019 to 2020, and it seemed like anytime you brought that up, people would just be like, no, you were bored, like it was a COVID year, you're bored, you need something to talk about, it was a COVID year, yada yada yada. So the Jacksonville Jaguars take him first overall. And has he been what people were touting him as? No. But when you're giving him that label, how can he? Like, the only way he gets to that level is if he becomes a top 5 quarterback right off the rip. And with Urban Meyer, that was never going to happen. Now, what I will say is that I think the contract that the Jaguars gave him was just absurd. Like, I don't know why they felt the need to extend him in that big of fashion, because as much as I think he is a solid to good quarterback, you're still paying for what he can become. And it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Like, they didn't have another option, so I get why they did it. But now they have they added Brian Thomas Jr., a receiver I really liked in the draft from LSU. Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley couldn't really find that connection last year. But regardless, he's still not a guy that I can look at and I can just be like, okay, he can elevate a team for what he's going to, you know, bring to the table. And honestly, that's one of the big things that people think about when it comes to Trevor Lawrence is, can he elevate the Jaguars? Is he going to take them from, you know, the basement to being a perennial contender? And while he has dragged them out of the basement, like, I'm pretty confident in saying that the Jaguars are never going to be as bad as they were for the past decade before they got Trevor Lawrence, it still remains to be seen what this team's ceiling actually is. Because yes, they made the playoffs in 2022, but they went 9-8, and the AFC South had 2 teams with top 4 picks, like the Colts and Texans, finished with the 4th pick and the 2nd pick, and the Tennessee Titans, their opponent, were playing with Josh Dobbs and Malik Willis as their quarterbacks in that game, and the Jaguars still just barely won it. So I think a lot of what people have to say about Lawrence is still untapped, because some people say he's great, some people say he sucks. Once again, it's somewhere in the middle. 15, Tua Tagovailoa. Now, this is just Trevor Lawrence on basically a better offense, because Tua, you look at him sometimes during the season and you're just like, wow, he legitimately could be a difference-making quarterback, but the inconsistency is so frustrating. Like, if I was a Dolphins fan, I would be so mad at what he brings to the table. And actually, while I was recording this, or in between my first half recording and second half recording, Tua actually did end up getting his extension, and it made sense because for how dirty the Dolphins did him early on in his career, he still persisted and still became a good quarterback. And he is a solid quarterback, don't get me wrong, but when the weather is cold, he disintegrates, and when it's a big game, he has not shown any propensity to win. Besides the Cowboys game last year and maybe the Green Bay game the year before. No, actually, they lost that game. Regardless, Tua can't win the big games. He can't beat Buffalo. If any time was going to be the Dolphins' time to win the AFC East, it was going to be last year, because the Bills midway through the season, I believe, were 5-6, so they were below 500 or at 500. My memory might be deceiving me, and the Dolphins still couldn't win the division, so that should tell you everything you need to know about Tua. Luckily, the offense is still going to be very good. You still have Mike McDaniel as your offensive play caller. You still have Devon Achane. You still have Raheem Mostert, and you just added Jalen Wright in this draft as well. And obviously, we know about their ecosystem. We know that they have speed out the ass. We know that they have speed everywhere in Miami. But once again, Tua is a guy who I just look at and I'm like, wow, he stays like a statue in the pocket. And for a guy like that who plays like that to succeed in the modern NFL, the Dolphins O-line needs to be on point, and it's all right. But when it has a bad game, it has a really bad game. And part of their offensive explosions last year came when the O-line played well. So yeah, Tua is a plus system QB. He's not entirely a Dolphins merchant, but he's just not what he was promised to be either. 14, Jordan Love. So this is a guy that in the first half of last year, a lot of people were really concerned about. A lot of people were just like, okay, he was developing for 4 years in the NFL, and he was sitting behind Aaron Rodgers, and maybe, just maybe, he can't play. But in the second half of the year, he really turned it on. And one of the big reasons why Green Bay had a resurgent run to a wildcard spot and ended up beating the brakes off of Dallas in the first round of the playoffs. So with Jordan Love, I was really impressed with his poise. The guy in the second half of the year was entirely different from the guy in the first half of the year. And when you're throwing to a million different skill position guys like Reed, Watson, Dobbs, Wicks, Musgrave, Kraft, Jacobs, and Lloyd, you already know that the Packers have a lot of weapons, and Matt LaFleur did a great job staying patient with Jordan Love and staying patient and letting his offense grow and make the mistakes that young offenses do, because this was the youngest offense in the league, and it's only going to get better. Like, for as scary as that sounds, they had the youngest offense in the league last year, and they were, in the second half of the year, one of the best in the league. So there's still so much room to grow. But Jordan Love, he looks like he's on track to becoming a dangerous weapon. And all we're going to be saying is, how did Green Bay do it again? How did Green Bay go from Favre to Rodgers to Love? Because that's absolutely unfair. 13, Kyler Murray. If you remember, before this past season, a lot of people were saying, wow, the Cardinals are going to be bad. They're going to get the first pick from their own suckage. They're going to get the second overall pick from Houston, and they're going to draft Caleb Williams, and they're going to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, only one of those came true, but MHJ went fourth, and the Cardinals didn't even need to get him from their own accord. Excuse me, let me clear my throat real quick. All right, thank you. But Kyler Murray, he is a great quarterback. I think that a lot of what's come out about him over the past few years, like, oh, he wants to play Call of Duty more than he wants to actually play in the NFL. Like, yes, the homework clause in his contract, it's not good, don't get me wrong, but he overcame a lot of discourse last year. A lot of people were saying Arizona is the worst spot to be in an NFL team. They were legitimately predicted by many people to have a 2-15, 1-16 record, just basically be what people thought, or what Carolina was last year. That was what I think Arizona was expected to be, but they overperformed. Gannon had this team playing very well, and when Kyler came back, it was a huge boost to the offense. Now, they lost mainly because they have no talent on the roster, or they had no talent on the roster, outside of a few guys who emerged, like Trey McBride. Obviously, you still have Budda Baker, and they had the best run game in the league from week 10 onwards, but Kyler Murray himself, he looked really, really good when he came back last year. Almost better than I think I've ever seen him under Kingsbury. So the expectations for Kyler are sky high going into 2024, just because you finally have weapons. You finally got your true number one receiver, and you have McBride going to his third year. And I'm just really excited for what Kyler Murray can do in 2024. 12, Jared Goff. We have another guy who was sent from LA to die in Detroit, and he has turned into a good quarterback, like a very good quarterback. for the Detroit Lions. I was not expecting a lot from Jared Goff when he got traded, because a lot of the narratives around Goff at the time, when he was moved, was like, oh, he can't put on his helmet without McVay helping him. And yeah, that's true. That was true. But the Goff in LA was nowhere near the same Goff that plays in Detroit right now. And he was a big part of the Lions' turnaround and a big part of why the Lions were able to revamp their entire franchise. And he was a big part of that whole cultural rebuild that they did with Holmes and Campbell. So we do need to give him his credit there. But he is the machine that makes the Lions offense run. When you're throwing to guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jameson Williams, you still need somebody to bring it all together. And I don't care that they play in a dome. I don't care that they, have these amazing weapons. Jared Goff, he has made a name for himself because he is legitimately a franchise quarterback, and he got rewarded very handsomely this past offseason because he is a franchise quarterback. I did not like his progressions even when he was at the Rams, so people were just like, wow, if he's going from the Rams with McVay to Detroit, how is he going to fare? And it turns out he fared pretty dang well. So really happy for him, especially after he was an afterthought in LA. This might make some people mad, depending on how you feel about it, but here's the reality of the situation. 2022 and the great year he had is an outlier at this point, because you look at 2020, didn't have a great year. 2021 improved, but still did not have that great of a year. And last year, yes, he was still good, but he was a big part of why the Philadelphia Eagles collapsed. Now, they did fire their offensive coordinator, so I am expecting this team to look a lot more cohesive in general. But once again, through 4 years of his NFL career, it's not easy to find, or it's pretty easy to find which year was the outlier. Regardless, he still deserves his praise for what he is, because he's not the inaccurate quarterback that he was when he came into the NFL. In 2021 and 2022, he was amongst the top in the league as far as on-target throw percentage, so props to him for being able to be an accurate quarterback now. But yeah, I still have my questions as to how far he can actually go as a quarterback. He played out of his mind in the 2022 Super Bowl, so I was really happy for him in that game. I really wish he got it done, because I felt like he deserved that. And honestly, I think one of the things that he will probably only remember from that game is that fumble. So I do feel bad for him in that regard, because he's a good quarterback, and he's somebody who, if he was on my team, I'd be very excited as far as how far he can go with the Philadelphia Eagles. And yeah, when you're throwing to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and now Saquon, yeah, it's just a match made in heaven, because the Eagles' run game, I expect it to be very good this year. I expect it to be good, even though they lost Jason Kelce. This offensive line is pretty good, and you have to consider Jalen Hurts as a part of that offensive line. Oh yeah, they didn't ban the tush push either, so there you go. 10, Kirk Cousins. This is a guy where if you look at certain sections of the internet, you'll say that he's underrated. He's a guy where if you talk in person to other people, you'll say that he's overrated. And Kirk Cousins, he was expected to be the guy that could push Minnesota over the hump. Now, for a few reasons, that didn't happen. I would chalk it up mainly to Mike Zimmer just not being able to get it done, and then Ed Donatel in 2022. And then last year was just a plethora of just disastrous faults for the Minnesota Vikings in general. But he was brought in from Washington, and he was expected to be the guy that could push the Vikings over the top. Was he that guy? Unfortunately, no. He did get better in big games over the past 3 years or so. Like, primetime Cousins is something that I'm not really scared of anymore, because he's had some incredible performances, especially in big games, where I look at him and I'm like, yeah, he is legitimately a good quarterback. So now he goes to Atlanta, where he's going to be throwing to a bunch of weapons that had been comically misused by Arthur Smith. And Kirk Cousins, he is not a mobile quarterback, and unfortunately he is coming off an Achilles injury, but I do have more faith in him and his propensity to recover than I do Aaron Rodgers, just because Kirk Cousins is younger, and also he suffered it, I think, when did he suffer it? Like October? Yeah, so he does have more recent playing time than Aaron Rodgers does, but he is a good quarterback, but I do have questions about him. I do have questions as to if he can take Atlanta far, because this division is entirely for the taking. I expect the Saints to be bad this year. I've already alluded to that. I expect Carolina to just be in another rebuild, retool year, and that's completely fine. I expect Tampa Bay and Atlanta to be the only teams really challenging for the division crown. But make no mistake about it, Kirk Cousins, he's a high volume passer, and he can make literally anything work. He can throw for 45, 50 times a game, and your offense is not going to be screwed. He was a lot of the Minnesota Vikings offense for the past 2 years because they really hadn't had a run game at all under Kevin O'Connell. So yeah, going from Kevin O'Connell to Zach Robinson, they run very similar schemes. I think Kevin O'Connell got hired from the Rams, right? Yeah. So Zach Robinson also got hired from the Rams. So I don't really expect Cousins to struggle much in this offense. It might be an adjustment for the O-line, for the skill position guys, but as far as Cousins, I think his play is going to remain relatively the same. And yes, Justin Jefferson, and he is nothing that Atlanta has. Like, as great as Drake London is, as great as I think Kyle Pitts can be, as much as we like Bijan Robinson, none of these guys are Justin Jefferson. But he does have 3 very, very good weapons who could ascend into another tier. Not Justin Jefferson tier, but another tier. Number 9, Brock Purdy. So the one thing I have to say about everybody who says that Brock Purdy, oh, he's a 49ers merchant, he's not actually that good, is, okay, then why wasn't this offense this cohesive under Jimmy Garoppolo? Because the 49ers offense over the past 2 years, ever since Brock Purdy took over, it has been better than it's ever been. And that is not me just talking, like, that's not me trying to hype them up or anything. That is just objective. You look at what they have done, and not only did Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey revitalize this team, but they elevate him, and Purdy elevates the team just as much as they elevate him. It's a 53-man effort, and Brock Purdy is Kyle Shanahan's quarterback that makes this whole system work. Now, one question I do have about the 49ers offense in general going into next year is, how is the Brandon Ayuk situation going to play out? Because Pearsall, as of yesterday, he did hurt his hamstring in practice, so that is something to keep an eye on. But you don't lose Ayuk and get better. Like, if Ayuk's not playing week 1, I think this team could be in trouble because Ayuk is their wide receiver 1. Debo is like their gadget player, and the 2021 efficiency and the role, it is never going to come back. But I still believe that he is a star receiver in the NFL, because you look at what he does with the ball in his hands, he is special. Always. I think for the past 4 years, he has been the highest NFL player in yards after contact per attempt. Now, if the 49ers had maybe one more second bought from their guard in the Super Bowl, we're talking about a team that probably wins it. And if you find somebody that can maybe block Chris Jones, or not even block him, just slow him down, then the 49ers win that game. Like, no doubt about that in my mind. And unfortunately, this offensive line, it still has some work to do. Because yes, you have Trent Williams, who is seeking a new deal, or seeking, I think, incentives or something like that. I do know that something's going on in his training camp. But Brandon Ayuk is somebody who, if the 49ers lose, this offense could be in trouble. Now, I know that with Christian McCaffrey, who was the best player in football last year, and George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, your offense is going to be fine. But still, with Brock Purdy, the real test to his ability and the real test to his poise and his presence is going to be, how does he do without Brandon Ayuk if they go that route? But regardless, Brock Purdy, he's not just a system quarterback. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Number 8, Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, I think he's been perennially disrespected throughout his time in the NFL, because he's a guy who he will always throw for 4,000, 4,500 yards, a lot of touchdowns. Teams, bottom feeders in the NFC, they're going to go into Jerry World and they're going to get the doors blown off them. They're going to lose 45-10. And Dak Prescott, he is a great regular season quarterback. Like, genuinely, last year, he gave you some MVP play. But he is going to be seeking a $60 million deal, reportedly, and that's just way too much for what he is in the postseason. And you can't really talk about Dak Prescott without mentioning the fact that when it does get to the postseason, he is horrendously unclutch. And any game that the Cowboys lose in the postseason is probably a bottom 5 game of his career. Because you think about Green Bay this past year, they were basically stat padding the entire fourth quarter. And you look at the year before that against San Francisco, they had no answer to anything that the 49ers were throwing at them. You look at the year before that against San Francisco too, and yes, they did have that opportunity. Dak didn't get the ball off in time. He scrambled with, I think, 12 or 11 seconds left, and they couldn't spike it in time. But a lot of that weighs on the fault of Dak Prescott, because he did not play very well in any of those games. And even if he did have flashes, it was probably too little too late. But he's a guy who I'd be excited about him as a Cowboys fan, just because you're not going to find anything guaranteed to be better. The Cowboys, they always have a stacked roster, but that stacked roster is diminishing as you're paying a bunch of guys. They've already had to retool their offensive line. They've already, lost some guys on defense who are key as well. And that's just what's going to happen when you have a loaded team and you can't get over the hump. Now, Mike McCarthy, I think we can say with confidence at this point, is a bottom half head coach in the NFL, because he can make it to the playoffs. He can I think Dak has kind of been carrying him to the playoffs, because Mike McCarthy was the head coach in Green Bay of the dynasty that never was, and now he's with Dallas, and they can't get over the hump. But Dak to CD, it's gonna feed families this year. They have no run game, and the only real other viable weapons they have are Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks. So yeah, Dak Prescott, he is going to play well this year. I expect him to be good, because whenever he's on, he is on. Like, there is some weeks where you can look at him and you can be like, okay, he played like a top 5 quarterback this week. But unfortunately, when the moment gets tough, yeah. 7, Matthew Stafford. I believe this is the highest I have. I think Stafford is my number 1 quarterback in the NFC. And yeah, I think so. So, number 7, Matthew Stafford. Now, you look at Matthew Stafford, and this is a guy who has just carried teams on his back. He has carried some really, really bad Lions teams that didn't have a lot of talent through, bad coaching, like the Jim Caldwell era, from the Matt Patricia era. This team has always been on his back, and he is a Hall of Famer. I don't want to hear anything else about how he only won a single ring with his time throughout his NFL career, because he is a great quarterback. And I think it's pretty evident as to how that is shaped up, because of the past few years. He has made absolute superstars out of Cooper Kupp. And Megatron, his great career, yes, he was a great player, but it wasn't a single effort. It wasn't a single effort by any means. So now he really helped the emergence of Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua, he was a 5th round pick, and a lot of people are kind of pumping the brakes on him again, because some people are just like, well, how is he going to do without Stafford, and how is he going to do without McVay? Once again, it's kind of an equal parts effort, where you have to look at it and be like, okay, Puka Nacua, yes, he had a great year, but does that happen without Stafford? I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but he was still relatively underdrafted. But Kupp in 2021, I think that was a true testament to Stafford's ability, because when he and Robert Woods were entering that year, a lot of people thought that they were, pretty equals as far as how they were as receivers, but Kupp ascended to superstar status, and Stafford was a huge instrumental role in that. Now, he's a guy who a lot of people have said that he's on borrowed time, that his elbow's shot, whatever, but he's still playing some damn good football. And he's one of the reasons why the Rams have been, kind of overperforming relative to the rest of the roster. And they're really good at finding late round gems. So yeah, but Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, Kyron Williams, those guys, I don't think they'd be anything without Matthew Stafford. And, that might be some disrespect to Kyron Williams, but at the end of the day, Stafford can elevate a team like no other. And I think that's been clear throughout his NFL career, and he continues to show that insane ability even as he gets older. Number 6, we have CJ Stroud. And this is a guy coming into last year where, I don't know, people were just like, yeah, he'll be either the 1st or 2nd overall pick. But I never, ever expected this to happen. A lot of people thought that he was just a product of Olave, of Wilson, of Jackson Smith and Jigba, and all that has gone out the door, because he is legitimately so good. And for a team that was in a lot of shambles last year, the Texans were not expected to be very good. They were coming off a year where Lovie Smith was just like, haha, I gave them the 2nd overall pick instead of the 1st overall pick. So CJ Stroud was your consolation prize there. So there you go, Texans fans. Karma is real. Now, with him throwing to Nico Collins and Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, he is going to have an incredible year, because it's his 2nd year in the NFL. He did play like a rookie at some points this year. There was never any point where he was actively bad, just needed some time to adjust to the NFL, but he legitimately had some incredible performances. Like the Tampa Bay game is something that I'm never, ever, ever going to forget. And he really helped the Nico Collins breakout happen as well. Same with Tank Dell, just magically overnight becoming the second best receiver in the draft class. Like that was insane. And Stephon Diggs, he's a guy who he could be a steady veteran presence at this point in his career. Like I don't think anybody's expecting him to be what he once was in Buffalo, but I could see like 700, 750 yards from him and just be a reliable contributor. So that's that. Dalton Schultz, he's another guy who, when CJ Stroud is looking for a security blanket in the red zone, there you go, Dalton Schultz. A lot of people thought he was a Jag when he was on the Dallas Cowboys, but no. He has found a home in Houston as well. And the Texans, they did add Joe Mixon to help this offense and in general, because one thing that this team was severely lacking last year was a viable run game. Devin Singletary, he did end up having a nice little year, but Dameon Pierce just kind of disintegrated overnight. So yeah, we do have some questions there, as well as the offensive line. Like, they still are a lower ranked unit throughout the league, but none of that mattered last year. CJ Stroud played incredible, and in theory, they should have made some improvements to their line, so especially during the draft. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how everything happens there. But my question is, why does another AFC team have to have a superhuman quarterback? Why does another AFC team have to have, in this generation where each quarterback that comes in is just more ridiculous and more absurd than the last one? I just, like, why? Well, if you're a fan of an AFC team, you're probably just like, dang, unless you're a Kansas City fan, because this is going to be a very tough conference. Number 5, we have Justin Herbert. So in 2020, a lot of people were saying that, the Chargers reached, but Justin Herbert had an incredible rookie year. Best rookie quarterback year of all time. And I don't even think it was close. I think he threw for 30-something touchdowns in his rookie year when the previous record was Baker Mayfield with 27. So yeah, Herbert played incredible. And he looks like a demon when he's on. I still remember the 2021 year and parts of the 2022 year where I was just like, oh my God, this dude is legit a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. But Brandon Staley, for all he did for taking the Chargers a little farther than they probably should have been in 2022, they completely disintegrated this past year, and it really came to light during that 20-63 shellacking without Justin Herbert as far as where this team would be without him. He is an absolute demon. He's a superhuman. When he's on, he is on. And now he's going to have to make something out of Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, and Kamani Vidal. Except my thing about Justin Herbert is, how is he going to react to a team that's going to be more run-heavy than we're used to seeing? Because Herbert in 2021, he could throw at will. He could, if he wasn't finding Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, he could just check it down to Austin Eckler. And that was basically what the Chargers' offensive identity was. But now you've added Joe Alt, you have Slater on the other side as well. Hopefully Zion can finally play up to his draft position. But once again, he can go toe-to-toe with anyone. And we've seen some Justin Herbert signature games. And there have been a lot of times where he has outplayed the opposing quarterback. But unfortunately, for a lot of the things that have happened with Justin Herbert over the past few years, I don't know. It's just been really sad to see, because this guy we could be talking about him as a top 3 quarterback potentially, if not for what he's had to deal with. But in spite of all that, you can see the talent's there. You can see the ability to make any throw. You can see the ability to throw off platform, and you can see the ability to effortlessly fire and hit a guy 50 yards downfield. And that is something that a very few handful of NFL quarterbacks actually have. So yeah. Number 4, we have Joe Burrow. And their season, the Cincinnati Bengals season, was basically over last year when Joe Burrow went down with that calf injury. And one thing that I will not forgive the Bengals for is, okay, so Joe Burrow, he had that calf injury, and he was about as effective as a quarterback as SpongeBob would have been out there for them last year. But when you have, in my opinion, the best backup in the league in Jake Browning out there, or granted, we hadn't seen him play yet. Like, he didn't have the Jacksonville or the Minnesota performances yet, so we didn't know how good he truly was. But still, he was a very capable backup, and you should have given Burrow his, the whole year. You should have just given him the whole year to heal up. He should have been allocated that time so that, week 7, week 8, he could play, and he could be the best version of himself. Now, unfortunately, he did hurt his wrist again against the Bengals, or against the Ravens on Thursday Night Football. So, yeah, it was just a mix of just disastrous components for the Cincinnati Bengals last year, but they still finished with 9-8, assuming, and all things considered, that was a pretty resounding success for how the season could have gone. But I do have a concern with the Bengals about their window, because when you look at the Cincinnati Bengals, okay, Ja'Marr Chase is going to be due for a massive extension. T. Higgins, he's probably out the door after this year, unless you can find a way to make it happen. I don't think it does. I like Burton, and one of the big things is, okay, you have Charlie Jones potentially being a good slot guy. You still have Yoshibas in waiting, but Burton should have gone higher at Alabama, and he would have gone higher if not for a bunch of character issues. And Joe Burrow, he is going to make magic out of these three guys. And the O-line has gotten better for Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals because they did add Mims, and he is a big upgrade from what Jonah Williams was. He was legitimately one of the worst starting offensive linemen in the league last year. So kudos to them. And hopefully this is the year. Hopefully this is the year that, the O-line and the health, hopefully it can all mesh, because Joe Burrow, he can do things that are special. He can do Mahomes-esque things. And when he is, playing well and playing healthy, a lot of people talk about him comparable to Mahomes, and I don't think it's necessarily invalid. Now, obviously, Mahomes is still in a tier of his own, but Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, spoiler alert for the next three guys, all those guys are just absolutely insane. And the Bengals, they have something really, really special with Joe Burrow here. Number 3, Lamar Jackson. So you cannot talk about Lamar Jackson without talking about the fact that in 2019 and 2023, he played some of the best football that we've seen from a quarterback ever, because the Ravens were an absolute unit last year. And I think last year's Ravens team is going to go down as one of the best teams ever to not win a Super Bowl, because they had guys like Justin Madubuike break out. They still had guys like Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton take those next steps, even though they were already good players. They took those next steps under Mike Macdonald, and unfortunately, they could not get it done in the playoffs, and a lot of that rests on the hands of Lamar Jackson. Like Baltimore, they came out against Kansas City in the AFC Championship game, and they looked scared. They looked like they had a mantra of, okay, we're going to show Kansas City how tough we are, and they just took stupid penalty after stupid penalty. And the crazy thing is, Baltimore still should have won. You basically gave yourselves a chance in the second half, but the Chiefs made too many, odds-defying, split-second plays that I'm just like, dang, there's really nothing the Ravens could have done. But with Lamar Jackson, he is an unbelievable quarterback. And I think any MVP quarterback that plays as well as Lamar Jackson does, you have to give him the respect. And he is a unanimous, pretty much top 3 quarterback in the league. Some people will have Burrow over him, but not me. Lamar Jackson, he just offers too much on the ground for me to prefer any of those guys that are behind him on this list to him. And with the Ravens in general, they did lose 3 guys on the offensive line this past year. So a lot of people are really concerned as to what the offense is going to look like. But they still have Todd Monken, and Zay Flowers is somebody who I didn't think was good as a prospect, but man, oh man, did he look shifty last year. Awesome, awesome player. Rashad Bateman is somebody who has not really broken out, and he's been a big part of the Ravens wide receiver struggles before they got Zay Flowers. Same with, who am I thinking of? I'm trying to think of who. Oh, Duvernay. Yeah. But Duvernay's a good returner, so there you go. And then, obviously, Mark Andrews is the second weapon in this offense. And a guy who really stepped up last year when Mark Andrews went down was Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely had a great year last year, even when Mark Andrews went down, and Likely became the second integral piece of the passing offense. Now, granted, Baltimore is always going to be a run-heavy team. They're always going to be a team that leads the league in rushing yards and has the most rush attempts in the league. And now you add Derrick Henry next to Lamar Jackson, and I think that's going to help Lamar Jackson's passing efficiency as well, because you have to respect Derrick Henry as a rushing threat. Is he still the same Henry that he once was with Tennessee? It remains to be seen, because Tennessee had no O-line over the past 2 years, but Lamar Jackson, he is special. He can actually throw, despite what people say, oh, you just have to contain him. You just have to keep him in the pocket. Yeah, I would like to see you do that, and let's see how that works out for you. So, yeah, he is an unbelievable quarterback. But, again, can he get over the hump? That is something that we all need to ask ourselves, because the answer right now, unfortunately, is no. they've been to an AFC championship. They've been to the divisional round where they were the number 1 seed and went 14-2. But ultimately, there's still some work to be done for Lamar Jackson, despite him being an incredible player. Number 2, Josh Allen. I remember the discourse about Josh Allen in the 2018 draft. A lot of people were just like, no, he's like raw. Like, you're not going to do anything with him. These raw, untapped quarterbacks, they don't work out. They don't work out in the NFL because, they can't actually read defenses. And does Josh Allen, can he read defenses now? Yes, absolutely. Does he still play with that same like gunslinger mentality? Yes, absolutely. But here is what is really going to be telling for Josh Allen going into the next year. They lost Stephon Diggs, and I think that's not really as big of an addition or a loss as people want to say, because you did add Keon Coleman, who I forgot to put. Okay, disclaimer, I forgot to put Keon Coleman in the notable receiving weapons category, but they did add Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. So what they're trying to do, because of the way their team is built, they just had to cut a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to be like the Chiefs, where it's just like, okay, we didn't have the resources to go out there and really build that good of a wide receiver room, so we're just going to get a bunch of role players, and hopefully it works out. And Josh Allen, he is a threat on every step, every yard of the field, because you have to account for him being able to throw 70 yards downfield, and you have to account for him being 6'5", 240 pounds, and one of the most elusive runners in the NFL, who can take on any sort of contact, one of the best red zone quarterbacks in the NFL, a guy who can put up points like nobody's business. And once again, I'm proud of him and where he is after today's breakout, or after the breakout in 2020, because it's uncommon to see quarterbacks take that next leap, especially in the way that he did. But man, oh man, did he look good. Has he looked good over the past 3 years? And he is definitively the second best quarterback in the AFC. Now, there are some guys who could ascend into that tier, because I don't think Josh Allen's like, you could reasonably have a couple of guys behind him as to who you think is the second best quarterback in the AFC. But I hope that he can finally get it done as well, because McDermott is not a good coach. Like, people are going to make excuses for him, but for what the Bills need, he's not a good coach. Brandon Beane is not a good GM. That's what a lot of people in my comments have been dogging on me for, but what has he added? What has he added to the Bills late in the draft over the past few years? Like, they have really, really struggled to add to what was a good team in 2020 and 2021. They've struggled to add roster-wise to it. And once again, I'm proud of where Allen is today after his Gianniminosaurus breakout. But if the Bills don't have Josh Allen, they have to turn to Mitch Trubisky, which, oh man, I would not be excited to see how that goes. But yeah, the O-line is good. They started winning games last year after they took the ball out of Josh Allen's hands, and I think that was because they played more complementary football. Like, it wasn't just because they started running the football, they started winning. The defense stepped up and really played well, even with a bunch of injuries. But yeah, so the Buffalo Bills, they should be better this upcoming year, because last year was about as bad as you could have had a year for the Bills, and they still managed to win the AFC East. So they still probably need a new coach, and they probably need a new GM. Number 1, Patrick Mahomes. Now, everything you need to know about the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes is at the bottom there. It's unfair that they have Andy Reid, Brett Veach, and Patrick Mahomes. Now, Reid in particular, I'm comfortable in saying that he is the second best head coach all time, in my opinion. You look at any of those guys, like people want to say like Bill Walsh and Vince Lombardi, like, yeah, those guys modernized the NFL, but I guarantee you put Andy Reid up against them right now, oh my God, I don't even think it's a question as to who can run a better offense. Like, yeah, you're going to be like, okay, the eras have changed, like, teams are doing new things, the game has evolved. Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, Reid has really evolved the NFL himself, because he took so many college concepts and like Big 12 concepts, and he made it work in the NFL. And for a while, nobody could stop him. And so basically, the only choice to stop the Chiefs now is to play too high shell. And Mahomes' ADOT was really low last year. Like, I'm pretty sure he averaged 4.5 yards per passing attempt, which was 24th or 25th in the NFL. But they made it work, and they still won the Super Bowl, even with a trash can core of wide receivers. And now you've added Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. But Brett Veach is the GO GM. Like, I don't want to hear anybody say otherwise, because name an executive that has done better at building a team than Brett Veach has done building the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I will say, At one point, I would have said Bill Belichick is the GOAT GM, but he kind of ruined that, and he performed himself out of that over the past 7 to 8 years with his performances in the draft and free agency. But Mahomes, I don't know if he's the GOAT yet. Like, there are a lot of people who have said that he is the most talented player to ever play in the NFL, and you know what? I'm not going to entirely disagree with that. But as far as accomplishments and how everything has gone throughout his career, potentially the GOAT quarterback. Do we need to see more? And do we need to see him rack up those accolades before we start talking about him as GOAT status? Potentially. But he can make any throw. Like, he is what has made this new play style of being the improviser, if you guys are familiar with Madden. He has made it work, and ultimately, he can just do anything that a quarterback. And he can do things that other quarterbacks cannot. Like, you can only hope to contain him, and that's what teams have been doing over the past few years with the Chiefs. And their offense, it wasn't what it once was last year, but their dirty secret is they won the Super Bowl off the backs of their defense. So you finally gave him a defense, you finally gave him an O-line, which is something he didn't have either of in his first few years of his career, and this is the result. And Mahomes, he can do things that other quarterbacks cannot, so you have a huge advantage there, along with having Andy Reid as your head coach, who will have any team well-disciplined and ready to play no matter how good the other team is. Personally, I thought the Ravens were a better team last year. The Ravens were a much better team than the Chiefs last year, but did any of that matter in the AFC title game? No, not even a little bit, because Reid and Mahomes and that combination is just so dang good. And Mahomes, he can elevate players, and he got Marquez Valdes-Scantling a roster spot elsewhere. Like, I think that should speak to the greatness of Patrick Mahomes. 2 MVPs at this point in his career, and he's going to win many, many more going forward. Regardless, the way I can describe him is he is overwhelmingly talented, and I think he's going to get a lot of other GMs and head coaches fired because they're going to take a gamble on what his play style is. They're going to get at that improviser quarterback that Mahomes is, and they are not going to replicate it because there's only one Mahomes, and there's only one guy in the NFL who can make that claim. So yeah, that basically does it for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.